I think marketers should be co-founders, not CTOs. Like, I'm allowed to have that thought. And other people are too. And I think that's what is exciting to me about the now of content, where it isn't about being the brand or the person who's like, this is the way that you do it.
Fame feels also like it's about control, right? Like, I need to amass this followers and I need to make sure that this looks right and this is whatever. And influence is, I'm going to give you the right answer and hope that you can then do the right thing with it.
There is a part of me also who likes having a spotlight feeling, right? That feeling of standing out from those around me.
I'm Margaret Kelsey.
And I'm Devin Bramhall.
And this is Don't Say Content,
a show created in partnership with Share Your Genius.
I pick a theme every year, and last year was audacity, this year was calm. I think the universe thought, because last year I was like audacity, and it presented me with scenarios where I could practice being audacious.
Yeah.
And so then I said, this is the year of calm. And I feel like the universe is giving me experiences to practice being calm. And I'm like, no. So I need to flip and reframe. I tried to now say, the universe supports me with calm clarity. I'm trying to do that instead of the universe is testing me with experiences for me to remain calm in, because I don't want that this year.
Well, I will say, though, that has been a lot of my mindset shift towards the end of last year and early this year was like, I can't control the world around me. All I can control is how I react to it.
Yeah.
And so it is helping me a lot. I've been working more on how I react to things internally and externally. And that is really providing me, incidentally, with a lot of calm. So I'm like, well, I picked a fight with my friend the other day because I was like, wait, I had fake calm before because I put up with behaviors I didn't like and that weren't good. And it's caused a lot of agitation in my life recently, but it's actually been good agitation because I don't want somebody in my life, they're going to gaslight me and I was like, no, bye. And it's weird because once I decided, I felt better about it. I was like, oh, that's how you get there. You have to recalibrate not just how you react, but how you think about things.
Yeah.
This is interesting that we're talking about influence versus fame right now for two reasons. One, we tried to record it before.
And we failed miserably and just did a bonus episode because we couldn't keep ourselves in line.
In line, yeah.
We were out of line.
We supported each other in being off topic for an hour. But then also, if you think about the place that we're in terms of the country, and I'm like, oh, interesting. I would say influence and fame have merged, and it's effing scary. So I don't want to talk at all about that, but it just occurred to me as we were kicking this off. I was like, oh, that's a combination of influence and fame, and it's scary.
Yeah. And context, we're recording this the day after the inauguration.
So, okay, influence versus fame. This actually came about from my goals post-cancer last year. 3 areas I wanted to focus on for myself. And at first, this third one represented itself as fame. It was when I said, I want to make money off of who I am as a person. I wanted to add that revenue stream because that feels like play to me, right? And then the more I started thinking about it, the more I was like, I don't want fame. Because when I thought about fame, I thought about having to post all the time. I thought about having to follow rules. I thought about algorithms.
Yeah.
And
being a public figure.
Yeah. And just, I got really stressed out. But there is a part of me also who likes having a spotlight feeling, right? That feeling of, in certain circumstances, sometimes being standing out from those around me.
Shut up, you jerks. I'm talking. Is that what it is? Is it like those moments of spotlight feel like everyone else can quiet down and you get to actually be heard?
No, that's the weird thing.
Yeah.
It was like how I used to run events in Boston. I would get up, sometimes carrying a megaphone, and get up there and talk. But oftentimes I was teeing up somebody else, right? And so abstracting that out, it's like I like when people come to me asking for recommendations. It allows me to feel helpful, which I love. We talked about this before. I'm like,
Yeah.
if Devin could marry a rich man, she would give away 100% of her time and feel great.
It's that
Yeah.
Cher quote, "Mom, I am a rich man." Have you seen that?
No.
There's an interview with Cher, and she's talking about how her mom used to say, "Oh, you need to marry a rich man." And Cher was like, "Mom, I am a rich man."
I just realized mine's a strategic move at this point because cancer wiped out my energy, like my physical energy, and I don't like charging. I don't know why. I'm like, I just want to help people who don't have money.
Your ICP is can't pay.
Yeah.
Individual who can't pay. It's an ICP. You got the acronyms mixed up. You're looking for an ideal. Was it ideal customer persona? And you just look for an individual who can't pay. Oh, that's good.
But also like, yes. Is there like a fund for that?
That's
Um,
hysterical.
yeah. So anyway, so I started thinking about that and I thought, oh, the helpfulness that I enjoy plus the feeling of exclusivity in some way, which doesn't always have to be public. Because if I want to be on stage in public, I just create a space for myself and do it and people come.
Yeah.
And that's where the influence is,
Yeah.
right? It's like if I want that moment, I can create it for myself. I don't need to rely on anyone else.
Yeah, and it's not that you're chasing then those moments that with enough influence, you can pick and choose how much visibility you want in any given scenario. And that is powerful, right? Rather than feeling like you always have to be visible, you always have to be on.
Yeah. And I even started, this is a very basic example, but even with LinkedIn, I'm a solopreneur, so I don't have help. So when I post on LinkedIn, for example, algorithmically, consistency matters. But see, I don't have time for that.
Mm,
And so what's cool about the influence part is it doesn't matter how often I post, right? It's like when my post gets seen, now it's not necessarily like hundreds of thousands, right? That's a
yeah.
different type of person with a different goal on LinkedIn. Mine is more about, when I post, someone must have sent my post out somewhere last week because it's like I post, a lot of action happens. I get like
Mhm.
100 connection requests. I get DMs about different things. I got a client recommended. Like if I take an action, activity happens, even if outwardly it doesn't look like,
A lot. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, oh, my ratios are really good. So when I post, there's a lot of comments, which
Mm,
makes it worthwhile for me because I'm
yeah.
not doing it to see numbers. I like want people to talk.
Yeah.
And so that's how it shows up for me, or an example of how it shows up for me is like, I want people calling me and being like, what should I do?
Mhm.
Bonus if someday that makes me money.
I think that your distinction is spot on of I would much rather be known even behind the scenes for the people that I have met before that they can come to me and I give good advice and I can help out and those types of things more so than needing to be everywhere or people recognize my face or whatever. And I think with this podcast too, I've said to you a bunch of times, I don't care if anyone listens because the hour that we record and having our conversations, and even before we recorded the podcast, when we would catch up and things, like those conversations were worthwhile to me. I don't think I've ever had goals around that. But I also had this funny memory of when I was younger, I think it was in elementary school, we were doing like science fair. I've had this consistent feeling until recently last couple years of my life that I thought all the problems were solved and I thought everyone was smarter than me and that I
Oh,
was like
yeah.
just catching up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there was like a long time where I'm like, why would anyone want to hear what I have to say about that? Or why would I have a unique point and perspective? And that's changed definitely in the last, I would say, probably 5 to 10 years of my life. But
Yeah.
I definitely had this deep held belief as a child and growing up that everything was already solved for and everyone was way smarter than me. And I just was like, happy to be here.
It's funny because I had a similar realization. Well, we've talked about what the specific realization that you're talking about, which is like
Yeah.
realizing that everything's made up and
And
like
no one knows anything.
no one knows anything.
Yeah.
There's no universal knowledge. But on more recently referring to the influence and fame thing, I finally figured out where that itch came from.
Mm.
I realized that it's really important to me to be heard, thus my attraction to lots of people listening. And the reason is I care about change actually happening. When people ask me about something or what should I do, is like I suddenly get this anxiety inside, like, how am I going to make sure this happens now?
Yeah.
And it's something that obviously not useful or healthy and trying to walk that back. But I realized it's like an agitation where I'm like, no, no, people have to hear this because I want to see the change that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then I realized recently that agitation goes away when I look around and realize I've surrounded myself with peers, at least in marketing, let's say, who believe the same thing.
Mm.
Not necessarily to the letter, because that's not important to me, but like they see the same things. They have their own interpretations and observations about it that influence me. And they're even disagreeing or like counterpointing, but there's like this fundamental alignment there. And I realized that's enough.
Mm.
That was when I was like, I don't need everyone. I just want to be around people who have a general mindset around this thing that's the same and are working towards it.
Did you feel early in your career you saw what needed to change or saw things that could have been done differently and weren't heard or listened or didn't have the influence within the organization to actually do any of that?
I'm like,
Yeah.
I think that was my entire marketing career. And some of it's natural, right? So some of it is just a product of everybody has a boss.
Yeah.
Everyone is beholden to someone. I found it more interesting and educational when I was CEO because it was more about logic and strategy and being clever versus the things I couldn't change as a marketer were industry-wide misogyny and just a series of people who are given money to run companies who are terrible at running companies. And so it was the system that bugged me.
Mm.
And I would say it's still true today. Like we've talked about this. Nothing's really changed in our industry, honestly. It's still there. It's just I feel calmer because there are people who listen to me.
Mm.
And by way of my clients, that satisfies the itch in me where I'm like, well, I can just help them do it better.
I think there was a really interesting moment when I went from being in-house to advising, where I was at this company I was advising and I was doing an on-site, sitting at the table with all the executives, and I pointed something out, and I had a similar conversation at a different in-house job where I had raised the same thing and nothing changed. And all of a sudden, by being external to the organization and having them pay me to be there to do that, of tell them what I was seeing and what could be done differently, they was like, okay, let's work on that. Let's change that. I see it
Margaret
too.
says, so we have to do it.
And I was like, nothing has changed about who I am as a person, except for the fact that now I am external to this organization and they're paying me for this. But isn't that what you also are doing for your employees, is paying them for their expertise and advice and ideas? It was the
One,
strangest thing. I was like, it was like a power trip. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is the way to actually be influential, is you just have to not work for the organization.
I imagine so many other people have had that same experience. Like, I'm sure you were one of them too. I certainly was, where it was like, there was always a Margaret
Yeah.
coming in, telling my boss what to do, my boss coming to me and explaining to me something that he knew nothing about that I was,
And then you're like, yeah, I've been asking to do that.
yep. And I remember how infuriating that was to me. And this is why I've never known what to call myself because I'm like, okay, fine. I may come in and focus on one area of your company, but what I end up doing is putting things in the right place, including how it relates to founders' perceptions of their own employees turning that around and being like, no, this person knows their shit. Like, I wouldn't be able to do this without them. I'm actually relying on them heavily. And, validating those people who are doing a great job, because I can't do this fucking shit all on my own. I mean, I can do a lot. Let's face it. I just realized, I was like, there's very few people like me out there who can do as much as I can do competently and with great confidence and succeed at it at the same time. So fine. But I don't like to. I like to have other people be better at things than me. And so it's fun to work with other people.
Yeah.
Wait, how does it feel going back now? So you were out of house. Now you're back in the house. How
But
is that?
I'm in house with somebody that I worked out of house with and established that relationship with in that advisor capacity for multiple years. So it doesn't feel as different of if I had joined a company that I had not understood or had built a relationship with the CEO with. So I feel really good about that right now of I'm still having conversations and pointing things out and being able to like align on that strategic level has been really helpful. But I think it's because it started as that advisor relationship and then went into the in-house role. I think of like times when you're trying to be influential and maybe it's in a work setting or maybe it's in a different setting. And there does seem to be this like a little bit of distance makes you more influential. You know what I mean?
That must be because you think about all the folks who are quoting others that they really admire. That's why, like, to me, there's a difference between influence and fame. Influence does inherently include aspects of fame, and it has to, because fame is, in a way, othering someone. This person is othered in a positive way, typically, although fame doesn't necessarily mean you're famous positively, but you're othered. And I think that's that distance that you're talking about. I think what I learned in pursuing consulting and trying to figure out what these other revenue streams might be, I found that the choice between the two was easier when I thought about what I wanted to achieve and where I have energy. Like, Jay Akonzo's a great example. I would say he's both, but like he's talked about before, like that's a dopamine hit for him, right? It's like that doesn't zap energy, that gives him energy. And so being out there at a more consistent clip doesn't stress him out. Ashley Fawcett's the same thing. And it's like, for me, I want to get up on a stage. I want to give a talk. I want to be at the conference, fully engaged the whole time till like early morning and then get up and do it again. But afterwards, I have to manage my social media at the same time. I'm like, I don't want to post while I'm here at this. So I think there's like, that's part of the difference. And I think that that's like how this conversation can even be useful to anyone. This can apply to your company as well, as like, if you're working in an area and you're thinking about your marketing strategy, it doesn't necessarily make sense for your company to be famous, because famous requires such a big group of people knowing about you that a vast majority of them aren't going to be relevant, right? It's like fame to me is uncategorized website traffic.
Yeah.
Whereas influence is like, maybe it makes sense for you to get to know like these 5 companies or get in with these 2 people who influence the buyers in your industry, right? Like maybe that's your marketing strategy.
And I think that's the most amazing. Did we talk in the bonus episode or another episode about the spindrift thing? I just had recently told this story about how I have a friend.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And it was like, I'm the influencer, but I would have never popped up on any sort of influencer list.
Well, but I think that's part of influence for me, is like how I define it. There's 2 different kinds of influence to me. There's the invisible kind where, like, a leader, right? A lot of the stuff that I espouse to animals, I see it out in the world in different forms from the people who work for me. I'm like, great. That's what spreading a message is all about. They're owning it in their own way. Then there's the direct influence of like, I learned this from Devin.
Maybe I'll reach out to the marketing team and let them know that I often drink Spindrift on this show.
Well, here's the other thing, is that's where I think the scale in terms of influencer marketing has been complicated, because I've influenced buying decisions. I've influenced executive hires to the tune of like, I'm the initiator. I don't need everybody to know that. But to me, I'm way more effective in that realm. And the influencer of me on the outside, that serves a different, more practical purpose for me. Like that's a revenue generator. It's like, okay, I'm building an audience because I'm writing a book and I want to go speak. And so I know the criteria I need to be appealing, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I want to do all these speaking engagements because I want to sell the book, because I want to make money, like some amount of money on this endeavor. I want to at least make up the time cost. And so if I think about where I have the most energy and where I really feel proud and excited, it's the invisible stuff.
Mhm.
I know other people. Walter was that way. Walter was the most well-known guy you'd never heard of. But all the people in the startup industry knew him
Mhm.
personally.
The thing that keeps coming up for me as we're talking is I used to get so frustrated when I would hear an idea of mine or like a whatever parroted back without any credit. And I think I've transitioned into this idea of influence being that you are like a mechanism for a good strategy or a good idea or a good whatever. And the goal is for that thing to come to life, not
Yeah.
for you to get credit for being super smart or super whatever. And that kind of brings it into like the fame would be I need the credit because I need the clout, because I need it to be attached to me, because I need whatever. But it almost feels like when I started to realize that the one idea or soundbite was not going to be my last. And it doesn't matter if I get credit for that one because I have other ones that I want to get out there in the world. Before it was like a scarcity mindset of I need to be attached to that because that's my one good idea. And if I'm not known for that, I don't have anything else. Versus
Yeah.
like can be a positive force for all of these different changes or all of these ideas to come out. And if it gets picked up and runs away from me and is a different, I never get credit for it. The fact that it exists in the world now or is like a different way of people doing stuff, that's the what I wanted to have happen anyways, is for like
Yeah.
the change to actually happen. And I'll have another good idea that maybe it'll be attached to me or credited to me or whatever.
Also, like, one, is it really your idea, or are you one of the people that like
Exactly.
secretly heard it somewhere? Two, it only matters, like you're saying, if you were building your business on
Yeah.
that concept and somebody
Well,
copy and
like
pasted it.
OpenView PLG, and then PLG started to get away from them. And it was like, no, we need to put our flag in the ground that we were the people that coined this term. And this is our standard definition of it and blah, blah, blah. Yes, that was important to do. Right.
Yeah.
If you want it to be a thing, you also have to let it go.
Right. And also, what is the value of it being yours to what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
When HubSpot was coming up, that's why everyone gets obsessed with like category creation. It's like, okay, they essentially created a category, but they weren't sitting there fussing about, we had the idea first.
Mm-hmm.
They were continuing to build on that idea, more and more assets that they either earned direct revenue for or built their reputation on that led them to this sort of ubiquitous place now. And so, because I'm like you, I used to be one of those too, where I'd be like, oh, and sometimes I'm not gonna lie.
Still bothers you?
No, it would be like, I remember Alex once, he was always like in his newsletter, like he always references people in it. And one time he's like, oh, I like mentioned that thing you said. And I was like, did you give me credit for it? Like that kind of stuff still bothers me when
Yeah.
people kind of like, they don't include you along the way just as like a kindness, a
Mm-hmm.
like fairness or whatever. But I used to care a lot about the idea too. And then I remembered at Help Scout, we didn't care at all. People would quite literally copy and paste a blog article and change it a tiny bit, like our competitors, and publish it like the next day. And we were like, ours is better. Like, who cares?
We had it first. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think,
Because if competitors are doing that, they're always chasing you and they're not doing the important work of going out there and building the path. So you know that they're always a step behind you because they have to wait for your dance move in order to copy it. Yep. So I was at AppQs too. We had a couple competitors that would do stuff like that. And I was like, that just means that they're always going to be a step behind us.
Yeah. Like
And
maybe you
we're going
already
to be
are an
ahead.
influencer.
And we're going to be ahead figuring out if those things that we're doing are actually working or not, and then killing the things that aren't working. And they're going to be copying the stupid stuff that we decided isn't part of our strategy anymore. So like, cool,
Yeah.
come on, copy us, you know?
Yeah. That's like, it's validation,
Yeah.
honestly, more than anything. It's like, it really doesn't matter from a business standpoint, a selling, like getting customers. It really doesn't matter if you're first.
Yeah.
Right? What do they call it? The second mover advantage or whatever.
Mhm.
I would like, ugh, I'm so sick of hearing that. Growing up in tech, there's so many things. I'm like, can we? No, I don't want to talk about that. But it is.
You
It's
brought
like,
up category creation earlier. I'm like, oh,
ugh, I know. You know what this reminds me of though? I posted something recently about marketers should be founders, not CTOs. And my friend Ronnie reposted it and he wrote this really beautiful, like, it was so poignant. I was almost like, you should have written mine because like yours is elegant. Mine's like, bah, 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 bah. And he did something that I thought was really clever. He didn't co-opt my idea at all. He used it to share one of his. He's like, this Don't Say Content podcast, Devin says, X. And he's like, this is something, this like supports this idea I had a year ago, which was ... And so it was like, it was a way to give both things. Like it gives me credit for the thing.
Yeah.
And it allows him to stand up and say, well, this is my idea. This other thing is my idea. And he made me look awesome. Like he made me look really good. I was like, wow, thanks. I was like, thank you. Love you, man. But I liked that approach. The thing I think that does bug me about copying is that I do find it's very self-conscious. It's like weak in a toxic way. That type of like the bad type of copying. I'm not talking about like, I used to copy the tone, or when I was reading a lot of Hunter S. Thompson and Tom Robbins, like I started writing like them. I didn't copy their words, but I was like definitely leaning into their tone. So there's a big difference. But I think the people who are just copying like that and also pretending they're not, they come across to me as unsettlingly self-conscious.
Yeah.
To the point where I feel like I want to get away from
I think
that.
they must walk around. I know the imposter syndrome I felt when I wasn't copying people.
Yeah.
And I felt like an imposter. I just imagine what they must walk around with. It must be very fearful to walk around being like, one day somebody's going to know that I.
That's why I couldn't copy, because I was like, what if they talk to me? Like if I say something, I have to be able to like back it up. My problem was I thought backing it up meant being like the world's leading expert on like the tiniest thing. Otherwise, like they're going to call you out because you don't actually know the dictionary definition of pencil and its entire history of how it was created.
Well, I would say overall content marketing strategy was formed is that I could not copy blog articles about web design or product design or UX because I knew nothing about it. And I was like, it was an imposter syndrome because I just knew that I didn't know anything. And so then I was like, I'm going to go straight to the people that know stuff about this and see if they'll write articles for us because I can't be writing these articles. I can like maybe edit them and make sure they're grammatically okay, but like the concepts I'm not going to be able to put together. And that was like the foundation of the entire Envision blog that then became like the publication for designers to read, is because I didn't trust myself enough to do the basic content marketing. Oh, put together a content calendar. I'm like, I don't know what designers need to know or what they'll write about or what anything. Like it was impossible to put together a 6-month content calendar because the whole thing was I would go to designers and be like, what are you seeing happening in the industry right now? What's something that's happening that you believe the exact opposite should be happening? What's something you wish you had learned? Then they would give me the topics and that would become the content calendar. But I couldn't do that to like a board level meeting for a year out because I'm like, I don't know. Who knows what they're going to come back with?
Well, and I think that's the really important point is like the difference between an idea. If you're confident and you're willing to look like an idiot and fall on your face And I'm speaking for myself because that was my entire career, barreling out in front of everyone and falling down. Ideas come to you constantly. And so you walk around confidently. You're like, okay, well, I can just come up with something else. But the thing is that you realize, and why you have that confidence, or at least for me, was an idea was never a topic.
Mm.
Topics to me are like knowledge. It's a commodity. It's what
Yeah.
you do with that knowledge is where the idea is. How you frame it, how you analyze it, who you bring in, like all that stuff. You could have two people with the same exact even title of a blog post.
Yeah.
And it could come out completely differently. And I think that that's where the talent is. That's where, and so I think AI especially has really highlighted that. It's like, oh, the what is the commodity.
Mhm.
It's the how that can't be automated or generated by a machine.
Yeah.
And that to me is the fun part.
And I think those subtle shifts of the how are really fun, right? I was like, it was a realization of even editorial director of the content. I have to be the content facilitator. I just have to like facilitate the idea, facilitate the production. I am just a facilitator in this process rather than having to be like the person in charge that gets to decide. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to manage the flow of this like creative energy and topics and ideas and content and whatnot. And
Yeah.
I do think that's something that's come up in this conversation a few times is like the releasing of control and like how powerful that is for true influence instead of chasing fame. Fame feels also like it's about control, right? Like I need to amass this followers and I need to make sure that this looks right and this is whatever. And influence is I'm going to give you the right answer and hope that you can then do the right thing with it. But like also I don't feel like I'm responsible for the outcome. You know what I mean?
Seriously. Yeah, and I think this idea you talked about earlier about thinking things were like there was a right way and a wrong way. There's a correct and incorrect. And I definitely experienced that. I think when you're coming up in your career and you're learning, like that's when that is really strong. And I think that right versus wrong was kind of a thing in content marketing earlier on. And even culturally, I always say, like, this isn't the 90s anymore. Like, it's not about what is the right, like, you're on trend or you're off trend.
Mhm.
It's about making choices and the way you communicate those choices and connect with other people to get them on board. That's the important part. That's the influential part. But also, that's why, while everyone's talking about this content demise or whatever, how everything commodity from AI and all of that, I think the opposite. Because now I can go out there on LinkedIn and be like, I think this.
Mhm.
It's not like I'm not saying this
AI
is
did not give me this insight.
no, I just
Yeah.
like, I think marketers should be co-founders, not CTOs. Like, I'm allowed to have that thought,
Mhm.
and other people are too. And I think that's what is exciting to me about the now of content, where it isn't about being the brand or the person who's like, this is the way that you do it, right? It's why I hate playbooks so much.
Yeah.
This is a way that worked really well for me and delivered this outcome consistently. Here's
Yeah.
like, you want to know what it is?
And I think instead of playbooks, it's moving towards aligned values. And you were even talking about how you realize now that you have less of that like anxiety or buzz or need to be heard because you're like, oh, I'm surrounded by people that kind of believe the same thing, or at least are operating from the same set of values. So are probably going to come to the same set of conclusions. And I always think of your values are your decision making framework. Like you run them through your values. And when you have the most ennui in your life, it's usually that you have two competing values that you don't know how to make a decision because both things are important, but you would make a different decision based on which value is more important to you, but both values are important to you and now you're stuck, right? And so I think of that now of it's not here is the rigid playbook, follow these steps. It's more let's figure out how we're making decisions or what we're actually like running that through in terms of the decision making framework. And then you can apply it to lots of different things that maybe historically you would have needed a playbook for each one of those activities. And now it's if you kind of know the things that are important to make the decisions, that's going to give you a more consistent playbook every single time.
Yeah. And I think it's true. I always like, you can't break the wheel until you learn everything about the wheel. I think some of that comes with your career. No reason why I was doing it this way.
Yeah.
And that's how I talk about it in the book. It's like, for me, it's a framework. There's a series of frameworks, but frameworks are flexible. And to me, I don't think values is really exactly how I would say it, but like your operating principles, right? You apply those to a framework, adapt the framework in such a way where those two things work together to achieve the outcome you want. And that gives you not only infinite possibilities, so that if your first one doesn't work, you're not like, oh, we failed, but you know why each thing is the way it is. So you're like, oh, if we tweak this one thing, it's easier to find those opportunities.
Yeah.
I'm going to hard stop us because we both have a hard stop. So there will be an ending somewhere in here, and it's fine. We meandered a lot in the last one. So
we're done.
We're
That's
done.
the end.
And that's it. Okay, y'all, that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, for listening.
We'll be back next week. And just remember, you're doing great. You're doing great.
30% of you are doing great. The rest, you got to get your shit together. Come on.
You know which side you're on this week.
You know.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
There are a lot of people in my life who have said to me, oh, I could totally see you getting arrested. They're like, I would love to see you get arrested.
In what context are these conversations happening?
I think we're talking about like who I am as a person and how I act.
Unlawful.